over the last 3 months, I discovered a new way to create. What you're looking at are real-time reactive visuals built and powered by a program called Touch Designer. I'm able to perform these visuals with mouse and key clicks, or I can use a MIDI controller. You can even automate parameters to music tracks and loudness levels. I made these visuals for a Tekken DJ set in collaboration with Brazilian YouTuber Dedeco, who makes these whopping PS1, PS2 era video game mixes. I was able to learn Touch Designer through this summer project and had so much fun. I learned a ton and I want to share all of it with you in this video. Because over the last year or so, I've honestly been bored with my normal way of creating in 3D. It just wasn't inspiring for me, maybe because it wasn't challenging, I don't know. It was just scary having those feelings, so I escaped it all to play music. And it became such a cherished hobby for me because it didn't pay the bills. There were no stakes, no algorithm to please. It was just myself, the hardware, and an infinite amount of excitement to play with all of it. And through that process, something clicked. I started getting all these ideas to make visual art that would accompany the music I was playing in real time. And I didn't know what program it was or anything like that. I just knew how cool would it be if, like, when I hit the bass drum, things would move. So in this video, we're gonna go deep and build this MegaMan-inspired audio-reactive real-time visual network together using Touch Designer and performing it with this MIDI controller here. And at the end of the video, we'll have ourselves a nice little jam. This video is sponsored by R.O.G. Stick around to see how I'm using their latest SCAR series laptop to make our audio-reactive art. All right, so we're in Touch Designer. Let's just kick things off with a little brief on how to move around this program so we're all feeling comfortable while we move forward. Scroll wheel is gonna zoom in and out. That's pretty obvious. Left click and drag will move us around our node network, and right click and drag will allow us to select multiple operators or nodes. I'll be referring to these things as operators or nodes throughout this entire video, but it's what these things are. It's what all of these things are. I'm hitting tab to find all of the different nodes to create all of our cool stuff. Comps, we have stuff like cameras and lights and whatnot. Tops are all of our 2D nodes. Chops are data-driven numerical triggers and whatnot. We have SOPs, which are like our 3D nodes or operators. Mats are for materials. And DATs house a bunch of text, raw data. You can use any and all of these pieces of data to drive a bunch of different effects here in Touch Designer. It has a search function. You can type whatever you want and you'll find it. Boom, you just hit enter to make a thing. Middle mouse button is a big one. If you click on an operator, it'll show you a lot of useful information about that operator. Especially if you find an error, you can middle mouse click it and get a bunch of data. You can also use middle mouse click to fine tune parameters, which we open with P. That's our parameter window. So resolution, we can hold the middle mouse button and fine tune it pixel by pixel. H, if we get lost, we can home all of the operators in our network here. The last thing I will mention is if we hit U, it's gonna take us to our master project setup, right? So this, if we hit P, pull up our parameter window, is our master project. We have our master resolution right here, and we can hit I to go in to this network. Think of it as like pre-comps in After Effects or something, right? So let's hold right click, select all of these operators, and start from scratch. All right, so you guys saw what we're trying to make here, and it starts with a box. So if I hit tab to open up our operator menu here, and we go to SOPs, our 3D operators, we can make a box operator here. And if you hit this little bottom right button, we can click and drag and interact with this operator. If we click off of that, on the right here, this is all nodes, right? So we know that these little pick whips come off and go into other nodes. Holding down the left mouse button, I'll hit tab and go into a transform node, which will house all of our, position, scale, rotation data. Again, I'm hitting P to open up our parameter window. We got our scale, translation, right? All this and that. From here, I'm gonna go into a null object. Now, it's really important to get into the habit of making null objects at the end of like a chain. Think of it as a checkpoint, because we're gonna be referencing a lot of these effects across other effects, and we're gonna be chaining things to a bunch of other things and keep things linked. This will make sense later, you'll see. Now, in order to do something with this box, we have to add a camera, add a light. I'm gonna come out here, hit tab, go to comp, and make a geometry node. And this geometry node is kind of like the thing that houses all of our 3D objects. I'll hit tab and make a render top. Again, tops are our 2D operators, right? And we have an error. If we middle mouse click, we can see there's no camera comp found, which means we need to make a camera. So I can double click here and go to comp and make a camera. And already, boom, we're seeing something here in our render operator. We could use a light though, so I'll double click and go to comps and find a light. And we can actually interact with this as well as the camera. Get a little angle here. I'm gonna go into the camera parameters again. I'm hitting P here to open this up. We'll go to view and I'm gonna make it an orthographic camera and just back this off. Try and get it as centered and aligned as possible. That should be good for now. The light is good as is. And we're looking good so far. Let's take this out to a null object. We can hit Alt-N to make that null object. And the last thing I want to do here as part of this little render network here is add a window, because we're going to want to full screen our performance at the end of the day, right? So let's come out here into a window comp, and we're getting an error. It's essentially looking for something to full screen, and that will just be our null. We'll set it as the window operator. And if we go down here, we can open as separate window. It's gonna be kind of a minimized situation. Let's fix that. So let's close that down. And when we open this up, I want the opening size to fill the frame and I don't want borders. So now when we hit open, it's our full art on screen, exactly what we want. Now, since going full screen is something that I do a lot when I'm performing this thing, I wanna make a shortcut for that. I'm gonna double click, go to our chops and make a KeyboardIn chop. And this allows us to press 1 and get a little toggle thing going here. I want to set that to 0. And if I interact with it, I can click and drag this, hover over our window node and drag it down to open a separate window right on that open button and set it as a chop reference. So now every time we hit 0, it's gonna go full screen. We hit escape to get out. Touch Designer uses a lot of Python, and you're gonna see it if you click on the text here. We can see that it is linked to this operator here. If we move it, we can see this little line with the arrow showing you that these two are linked in this way. You can use Python to go crazy with Touch Designer. It's very handy. I'll be showing you a handful of little Python codes throughout this video, and I'll have a bunch more down in the description for y'all. So let's go ahead and select our null, and there's this little button right here, this blue dot. Let's click that. It'll display it on the background. I always have this on. And if you notice this little checkerboard thing here on the background, I'm gonna right click, go to display, and turn that off. Show network editor grid, I'll just uncheck that. I want a black background, so I'm gonna right click here on this wire and insert a transform operator. So I'll hit P on that transform, and we're gonna comp over background color, turn that on, and set the alpha value to 1. And that's our basic render network setup. All right, so let's clone this cube a handful of times via a grid. And lucky for us, if we hit tab and go to our SOPs menu, we can type grid and make one. Interact with it, and we'll notice if you hit W for wireframe, you can tell it's a grid. It's not just a plane. Hitting P will bring up our parameters, and we'll just make like an 8x8 grid. What I'm gonna do here is clone this cube via our geometry comp. There's an instance tab here. We can turn that on, and it's looking for a default instance operator, which is what we're building out right here. From our grid, we'll come out to a null, and we want to convert this 3D grid into 2D points. We'll drag out from the null, hit tab, and go to chops. Convert it, SOP to chop. Boom. Now we've got a bunch of graphs. TX is a little hard to read. We got TY and TZ. We got XYZ data. From here, we'll make another null. We'll call this instances, and if we select the geo and drop this instance node right into the default instance operator, it will be available for us to select. So let's select it on the translation X, translation Y, translation Z, and we just need to scale it down right now through the transform. Middle mouse button will help us fine tune these settings here, and let's just adjust our camera a bit. We'll interact with it with that bottom right button, scroll in here, and that is looking good. So let's hold Alt and drag and group this, and we'll just call it instances. Easy enough. Next, we'll want to color all of these cubes. So let's hit Tab, go to our tops, our 2D effects, and we'll search for noise. All right, we'll drag that out, looking good. And I'll just uncheck this monochrome box. Now we have color noise, and we're gonna do the same thing here, okay? Let's hit Alt-N to make a null, and I'll drag this out and do the same thing. Convert this 2D data into point data. Here's all of our colors on a graph, and we'll give it another null object. And we want to merge these two together. You can do it with a merge node. So we'll make some space, right click, insert an operator, type merge, and we can pipe this in right down here. Now we don't need the alpha, we just need the RGB. So if we navigate to our geocomp, we see there's a second instance tab. It's also looking for a color operator, but since we plugged in our default instance operator up top here, this goes for everything, and we can select R, G, and B for our cubes. We want this to shift and pulse, and we're gonna do that with a little bit of Python. So we'll select the noise, we'll go to transformation, and we notice if we middle mouse button move this around, it's shifting the noise via the Z translate. But we want this to just move automatically. So one of my go-tos, I use it all the time, is abs for absolute, capital T, time dot seconds. We hit enter, and it's pulsing. It's too fast though, so we just need to slow it down. We'll do times 0.1, and now it's slowly shifting. You can see the colors shifting in the background. You can see the graph shifting here. I want to adjust this though. I want to make it a little bit brighter. So we'll come back to our noise settings, and we will increase the amplitude for that saturation and contrast. I'll increase the offset a bit because I don't want any dark colors. I just want to keep it as bright and vivid as possible. Let's also go back to our light and give us a bit more brightness here. This feels good to me. Let's hold Alt and drag around our color, and we'll just call this color. We can hit 0 and just watch a bunch of cubes shift in hue, and I guess that's cool. Nice little screensaver situation, but we have so much more to add. I think it's time to shout out today's sponsor, R.O.G, because everything we've made so far was done on the R.O.G Strix Scar 16, and it's the most powerful RTX 5090 HDR gaming laptop on the market. Now, I've always used gaming PCs and laptops as render workstations because they actually have the same demands. The Scar 16 can ship with an NVIDIA RTX 5080 or an RTX 5090 for 24 gigabytes of VRAM, which is great for large scenes in Unreal Engine, Blender, or Cinema 4D. It also comes with an Intel Core Ultra 9 275HX processor, which means you got plenty of power to support all the CPU-based effects in DaVinci, Touch Designer, or After Effects. And if the 32 gig RAM stick and 2 terabyte NVMe SSD aren't enough for you, you can turn the laptop over, open the back without tools, and make upgrades yourself. And this one's small, but I love this. The USB-C slots on this double as charging ports, so you don't have to bring the giant battery brick when you're on the go. I've been loving this beast, so if you want to learn more about it or pick one up yourself, click the link down in the description. It helps me make more videos like this and is a great way to support the channel. Shoutouts to R.O.G, and thank you all for taking the time to listen. The next thing we're gonna do is have these cubes swell over time, and we'll do that with a chop called LFO. An LFO is just an oscillator that goes back and forth between two values. We can set it to a triangle, we can set a square wave. Sine is fine for what we're doing. What I'm gonna do here is hit Alt-N and come straight out to a null. And I'm actually gonna right click that insert operator and make a rename chop, because we're gonna start pairing this stuff up, and when we pair it and then change its name, the link will be broken. So we're gonna rename this to Swell, and if we interact with this null, I can click and drag, hover over the transform op, and drop it into the uniform scale set as chop reference. Right away, you can see what it's doing. It's going from -1 to 1. It doesn't look good. I'll right click and insert a math chop. Now a math chop will let us remap values. So if we go to the range tab, we can set the range from something like 0.05 to 0.1. And it looks weird, it's going beyond 0.5. That's because the from range is 0 to 1 by default, and an LFO is going from -1 to 1. So just make sure that you double check that, you set it -1 to 1, and that's looking great. It's just too fast. So let's set the frequency to like 0.05 or something. So it's real subtle. I want to control the max swell size with a slider. Good thing Touch Designer has got a slider comp here that goes from 0 to 1, right? So let's bring this out to a null and let's interact with it and drag it to this math chop that we know sets our max size here. Now, because this slider is going from 0 to 1, it's too much. So we're gonna right click and insert another math chop and just set the max value to something like 0.15, which is a bit more manageable, a bit more reasonable. And we'll right click and rename this to something like Swell_intensity. Now you see right there, it was unlinked. That's because we added the rename after we paired the parameter. So you can go back to the math, you can click this red arrow here, you can look at the Python string. So it's looking at operator null17, which does exist, and it's called v1, but we just changed the name, it's called swell intensity. So let's just correct this and call it swell intensity. Boom. Now it's relinked. Let's just alt drag all of this and call this swell. Next, I want to have the cubes flip every time I hit the 1 key. So let's go ahead and make a KeyboardIn chop. We'll drag this out to a null and we'll insert a rename. We'll call it flip, and we'll go ahead and drag this all the way up into the transform into any one of these rotate parameters. We'll go with the Z and we'll set it as the chop reference. So every time I hit 1, it's actually gonna rotate like 1 degree. You can't really tell that it's doing a thing. So let's right click and insert a count chop. So now every time I hit 1, it's counting up to infinity, and you can see these cubes rotating. But instead of counting 1, I want it to count 90. And y'all know we've been using it. The math chop will allow us to set that range from, instead of 0 to 1, it's gonna be 0 to 90. Right, so now every time we hit 1, it's flipping. But because a cube looks the same on all sides, you can't tell it's flipping. So we're gonna add one more operator. Let's insert a lag chop, which is just gonna lag the time. You can see that number is like creeping up, and you can change the lag amount too. So we can set it to 0.4 and 0.4 or something, so it's a little slower. We can give it some 0.2 overshoot, so we kind of get like a little bounce back effect. Make it a little snappier, set it to 0.2, 0.2, right? We can see them wobble, and so much fun. We can go negative with it too, so you can take that math and go -90, hit 0, and just be like, dish, 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 dish. Let's go ahead and alt drag this guy and call it flip. Simple enough, y'all. So now let's have a button press pulse these cubes in some interesting patterns. Is gonna start with the KeyboardIn chop, right? And we'll set this one to 2 this time. So every time we hit 2, it's gonna do a thing. And let's go ahead and take this out to a null with Alt-N, and we'll insert that rename and call it pulse. And I wanna pop this into a node that we don't have yet. Let's go ahead and make some room. And I'm gonna insert a noise. And the noise, it's a little intense, and by default, it's using this abstime.seconds script here. So let's go to the noise and bring the period down to like point whatever. This looks fine. I'm gonna drop this amplitude down to 0, actually, because that's what I'm going to affect, this amplitude, with this KeyboardIn chop. So every time I hit a key, I want to go like push, push. So we'll link this up and set it as a chop reference. So now every time I hit 2, it kind of like turns on, and whenever I let go, it turns off. And we know that a lag chop will help us get a bit more, right, out of that button press. And we'll want to remap this as well. So let's right click and insert a math. And we'll take it from 0 to, let's try 0.5 or something. That might be a little heavy, but that's all right, because we're gonna make another slider to control that intensity. So let's hit tab and let's make a slider comp here. We'll interact with it. We know it goes from 0 to 1. And let's drag this out to a null that we will insert a rename for pulse intensity. And we'll link this up to the math max value there. So every time we hit 2, nothing happens because our slider's at 0. But the larger we get with our slider, the crazier that pulse gets. And I can probably leave the slider as is right here. The last thing I want to do with this pulse is add a scatter slider. I'm gonna just copy all this and we're gonna call this scatter intensity. And the scatter intensity is gonna point toward the noise, but it's gonna go to the period. I want these moving whether or not I'm pressing 2. So what we need to do is actually add these together. So we'll go to our noise, and the amplitude, it's gonna be our pulse, but it's also going to add the scatter amount. So I'm just gonna hit plus. I want it to go to operator null 11, which is called scatter underscore intensity. So now these values are being added, right? Every time I hit 2, it's pulsing. And then I want to give it a little bit of motion, so it's always moving. And I do want to remap this value, so we'll throw a math in here. Let's take it from like 0 to 0.5 at the highest, right? So we can really like scatter these out, and it's moving a little too fast. So we'll select that noise, we'll go to the transform where it's being animated here, and we'll just do like times 0.1, right? So it's nice and slow. This is getting sick. Let's hold Alt, let's get all this together. We'll call this pulse. And I'm actually gonna drag these guys down and make a separate one called scatter. Yeah, that feels better. Now I want to be able to press a button and have all of these rows of cubes shift back and forth. Bear with me on this. If there's a better way, please, please, please let me know. But let's go back to our grid. Let's really make some space for ourselves here. We're gonna insert a twist sop. And think of these like as effectors in Cinema 4D. We're gonna change this to a shear, all right? And if I go in here and hit W for wireframe, we're gonna need that because it's really gonna let us know what we're doing here. I'm gonna bring the strength to like 0.01 and make sure our roll off is at 0. And you'll see we kind of got this little jagged edge up here. Now I want to shift this value over to the far left. So I'm holding middle mouse button, moving just by 0.1. And we're essentially just gonna like rep this effect a handful of times until we have a zigzag look going. So I'm gonna copy paste this. If we drag this out, we can drag over this little line and replace it. And same here, we'll drag over this line and replace it. We'll just shift this pivot point down and actually invert it, right? So we're getting this like inverted effect. I'll do this down the line until we got the whole thing zigzagged back and forth. Perfect. All right, so we have about like 7 of these twist stops. I want to be able to press a button and have those invert, invert, invert. I'm gonna hit tab and we'll make a keyboard in chop. We'll set that to be 3. Every time we hit 3, it does that. And we're gonna go back and forth. The best way to do this is with a count chop. We want it to loop. So let's go to the count tab and set this to loop to a number of 1. And now we can see it's going back and forth between 1 and 0. So let's take this and Alt N to come out to a null. Let's rename it. We'll call this shift. And I'm gonna pipe this value in to all of these twist stops. So I'm gonna select them all holding shift, and it's this strength value that we want it to go into. So I'm gonna click and drag and pop it into strength. set it as a chop reference. So now every time I hit 3, they're being shifted so far that they go off screen. So we need to remap these values. We'll right click, add a math chop, negative 0.01, 0.01. Yay, okay, it's kind of doing a thing. But I want to throw that lag on it, so let's make some space. But it's still a little much. I want to be able to control the intensity again with a slider. Let's hit tab, let's make a slider comp, and let's remap its values with a math to something like 0 and 0.05 as our max. Create a null with Alt N and insert a rename called shift_intensity, and we'll pair that to this math here, the max value, as well as the minimum value. And I want the minimum value, if we click the numbers there, we can go into the Python and just multiply it by -1. So now it's just these same numbers, but one is negative. Every time we hit 3, it's going back and forth, and I can bring that slider down to a smaller number, and let's actually take this to like 0.01. Subtle little back and forth. Let's take our scatter amount down so we can kind of see what this is doing. But you'll notice it's actually not doing what we want it to do. I know what happened. Every other one needs to be negative. So let's click every other one, and we'll go into the Python here. We'll click these numbers and we'll multiply this by -1. Now, every time we hit 3, they're shifting how we want them to shift. Now we can take this max up to 0.05 because it's working a bit more proper now. If there is an easier way to do this, like to take this grid and make it zigzag, please let me know. This is just the best way I could figure out how to do this. It was a little bit tricky, but hey, the result works. I like it. This lighting is not working. Let me fix this. So much better. Right now, this transform is getting our black background. We'll swap out this transform. Let's make a constant top, basically a solid. We can make this whatever color we want. Let's go with that for now. And I want to put it over top of this render right here. Let's delete this, and we'll insert a composite operator, which will allow us to composite this constant over this background. Now, obviously our resolution is messed up. That's because this composite node is dealing with 2 different resolutions. If we go to the common tab in our render top, we can see it's 1280 by 720, and the constant resolution is 256 by 256, and it's taking like the lower resolution here. We want to just take this to 1280 by 720. Now we could just type that in, but I'm actually gonna use a little script here, me.parent parentheses dot width. Copy that, paste it here, and switch it to height. And what that's doing is referencing our parent resolution. If we hit U to go up a layer, this is our main project comp here, and the resolution is 1280 by 720. If I were to change this to 960 by 540, hit I to go in, we can see that now the resolution of our constant is 960 by 540. Now let's disconnect our constant for just a second, because I want to pipe this into a switch top, and that will allow us to switch between any number of inputs. Duplicate this a handful of times. We'll drag all these and pipe them into that switch and just change these colors here. Perfect. Now, when we switch between these numbers, we can see this background is changing, and we just pipe this in here. I want this to just kind of fluctuate, and we can do that with an LFO chop. Let's change this to a triangle, and this will actually move linearly between -1 and 1, which is good. We'll actually remap this with a math chop here and take it from -1 to 1 to 0 to 1. And we'll come out here with a null, and let's go ahead and pair this null up to the index. Now, we actually needed to go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in order to get the blue. And let's slow this way down. You notice how it sits on the blue for much longer? We actually need to just shift this a little bit and take it from like 0.5 to 3.5, and then all of the colors will be on screen for the same amount of time. So let's just go ahead and alt drag this, call it BG color. Next, I want to have some of these boxes be just a wireframe box. We're going to duplicate our geo. Hit tab, and we'll make a material, constant material, and we'll drag and drop and select parameter material. So this render top is actually rendering both of these at the same time, which is exactly what you want. You just can't tell at the moment. I'm gonna select this constant. We'll hit P to bring up the parameters. We'll go to the common tab and turn on topology wireframe. And let's just get a line thickness of 3 so we can kind of see. We got all these little wireframe boxes here that are sitting inside of our solid boxes, and they're both being rendered at the same time. Next, what I want to do is delete like half of these solid boxes to give us a little bit of variation. So what I'm going to do is pull off of our final grid null object right before it gets converted to a chop here. And let's just pull this down over here and put it into a delete SOP. Turn this on, let's hit W so we can see our wireframe. Come out to another null, and we'll convert this null from a SOP to a chop. And finally, put this into our merge here. So we have 3 other values that were just added. So far, they're the same. Let's see if we can't delete them. So I'll hit P, bring in my parameters, and let's go to operation. We want to delete selected. Entity, we want to delete the points. We'll use number, we'll turn that on. That deleted everything. We want to delete by a range, and by default, this is working. Selecting 1 of 2, and if we go back to our instances here, and we go to our geo, instead of instancing everything, let's do the TX1, TY1, and TZ1 that we just added. And now every other column is being deleted. That's exactly what we want. So next, I want to set up a button that flips the camera like 45 or 90 degrees. Let's navigate up to our camera here. And by the way, I'm just hitting this little button on the top left, the viewer button. It's a good way to save on your GPU because it has to render all of this stuff, and it's just a good way to hide it. We'll turn it on though for now. If I go in here, I hit P, and we'll go to the X-form settings. The rotate here is what we want to change. We want to kind of do a little flip like this, right? So let's zero that out, and we'll make a KeyboardIn chop as usual. I believe we're on 4 now, and we want this to flip, I think 45 degrees. We know we have a count chop we can use, so let's get that going into the count, right? So every time we hit 4, it starts counting up, but we want it to count up by 45 instead of 1. So we'll use a math chop and change the range from 0 to 45, but now every time we hit 4, it flips 45 degrees. Take this out to a null with Alt-N. I'll insert a rename chop. We'll call this flip. And in order for this to look nice, y'all know we're gonna insert a lag. That's gonna give us a bit more smoother animation from point A to point B. And we're just gonna plug that in to the camera's Z rotation. All right, so every time we hit 4, 45 is not the move. We need to change it to 90. And that looks great. Now it's just a matter of lighting here. So let's bring our light back in, and we're gonna copy paste it. And let's go in here and just kind of move it around the back, switch it to the opposite side, and that should light everything up properly. So every time we flip this, yeah, it's lit from all possible angles, and it's looking really nice. Alt click all of this here, and we'll call that flip. Next, what we want to do is a little tricky. Shout outs to the Touch Designer Discord. A lot of people are very helpful in there. Special shout out to Dog Guy. That dude is a champ. He knows the answers to everything. What I want to do is when the bass isn't hitting, I want these cubes to kind of float and move around amorphously, right? We know we have this kick trigger doing a thing. I'm going to pull this down, and we're gonna go into a lag chop, all right? And I'm probably gonna set this to something like 0.3. If, by the way, if you hover over just the name, you can actually change both of these values at the same time. So we can see values moving like crazy. So that's what the lag chop is doing. I'm gonna come out to a logic chop, right? This is a new one for us. And we wanna set this to turn on when the value is changed. Because what we need is basically a trigger to start like a timer, which we'll put into the rotation of these cubes. We need the timer to start when the bass isn't hitting. Where do we get this timer? Well, we can use a count as well. So let's go out to a count chop, and we want to set its instructions pretty specifically here. Let's go to the count tab. While this logic chop is off, we want it to increase count by time. So we see it's counting up. Now imagine this is paired to the rotation of the cube, right? But now we start hitting it's on 10. We don't want it to be on 10. We want the rotation to be 0. So when it goes from off to on, we want to reset the count by 0. It's exactly what we want. Let's get a null going here. We'll get a rename going in here, and we'll call this float. And we're gonna pair this to the cubes, the transform up here. Let's get it going in both of these guys. And we're gonna multiply it by like 10 for both of them right now. So it's a little bit faster. All right, so when we boom, 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 hit the bass, it's snapped to that 90 degree. And when we let go, they start floating. We want them to gradually transform into that floating state. And I'll insert a lag right between the count and the rename. And if we set this first value to like 7 seconds, it's a really long transition. We can be hitting that bass, and when we let go, you can't even tell when it triggers, and then they start floating. It's perfect. Let's go ahead and alt drag all this stuff, and we'll call this float. The last thing I want to do as part of this float state is blend these backgrounds into each other. Now, the switcher actually has a blend inputs on off checkbox. So we need to get the logic chop in here somehow. And instead of dragging it all the way down there, all the way up in here, what we can do is use a select chop and drag the logic. Where are you? Float. There it is, logic. I'll just drag that onto the select, and now it's just our logic chop. Now, what we want to do is link these up. All right, but if I were to do that, let's turn this into a null. Let's go ahead and bring this up into this little on-off box. It's actually inverted. So when the bass is hitting, the colors will be seamlessly changing, but we actually want the opposite. We're going to insert a math, and instead of 0 to 1, it's 1 to 0. So now when our boxes are floating, our colors are morphing, and then when we hit the bass, the colors are snapping. It's exactly what we want. Now the very last effect, I just want to do some simple grain and a scan line effect and kind of down res it to make it seem a bit more nostalgic, like it's coming out like of a Game Boy or something. Let's go ahead and make a noise top. We'll hit P, and we want this animating by default. So we'll go to the transform tab. Let's animate the Z value. Remember that abs time.seconds? We're actually gonna do abs time.frame this time. So every frame we get a new seed of noise. And then all we gotta do is drag the period all the way down so it looks like grain. Now notice the resolution is 256 by 256, and when we pair this over our little composite node, it's gonna look weird again, right? So we can use that script again, me.parent parentheses dot width and me.parent parentheses dot height, which will set that to 1280 by 720. Now we want to put this over this. So let's go ahead and take it out to a null, and we'll bring this into the composite chain here, and we want null 19 to be on top. I'm sure this is a compression killer on YouTube, huh? Let's right click and insert a level top, which will allow us to turn down the opacity. We'll go to the post tab and just bring that down to like, I don't know, 0.1 or something. And it's super subtle. Yeah, that works for me. And for the scan line effect, we'll use a ramp top, which you've all probably seen this before, right? Let's go ahead and set it to vertical. And let's take the period down to like 0.01. And we'll get that scan line effect, change its resolution again with our handy dandy little script. And we'll copy the level and this null and replace the level with the scan lines there, and pipe this null into the comp. Let's go ahead and name this stuff. We got scan line, noise, and we'll make sure in our composite that the scan line is also on top of everything. It's looking a little large, so I'm gonna take that phase down to 0.005. And lastly, I want to take everything at the very end, right before the null. Let's down-res this. So we'll do a resolution top. And if we go to the common tab, we can hit the output resolution, set it to custom resolution, and have it be something like 480 by 320. And that is really gonna chunk it up. The visuals are done, our network is complete. We just need to replace the keypad in options with button presses from the KeyStep Pro. Now I made sure to plug this into my computer before I booted the project to ensure it'll show up when we go to the dialogues window and we hit MIDI device mapper. The in device, you should be able to select the KeyStep Pro, and we can go to devices and add a device. We'll call it KeyStep Pro. And you'll see that whenever we press buttons, they appear down in the little MIDI console down there. That's exactly what we want. Now we can close that and make a MIDI in chop. And now every time we press a button, it's going to appear here. We have a bass, we got a hi-hat that we want to add, and we got a snare that we want to add, and then I'll use just like one of these buttons out here for our camera flip. It's not paired to a sound right now. Let's find our bass drum. It's channel 10, note 61. Pipe out of here and go into a select. We will grab from the channel names here. The star means it's grabbing everything, but we just want channel 10, note 61. That's going to be our kick drum. And instead of the key press in, we're going to use this. So let's find our pulse, right? I think it was 2. And I'm going to replace it here and here, right? So we can get that out of there, get that in. And now, every time we hit the bass, this is pulsing. Now we're gonna do that for the hi-hat. So that's channel 10, note 66. We'll just duplicate this and change it to note 66. When we hit the hi-hat, yep, that triggers properly. And I wanna set this to the shift right here. So that keyboard in right there, that shift, I want this to be the hi-hat instead. We'll get that in there. And now every time we hit the hi-hat, it's shifting, yay! We'll get the snare going. So we'll swap this for that. Every time we hit the snare, we get a flip. And lastly, I want to get that ghost note hooked up to our flip. We'll switch that out. Yep. All right, now for our sliders. So I got all of these hooked up just like I did the buttons. But you can see that I've maxed these sliders out at 127. So we have to be sure to change all of the math chops from 0 to 1 to 0 to 127, right? Let's start with our bass intensity. So all we gotta do is move the slider out of the way, replace the connection, and we can test it. It's gonna be size min max. It's crazy. Remember, we gotta change it from 0 to 127. And then we're looking good. Let's go down the line. We got our bass intensity, so let's replace that. Get that out of there. And we'll need to add a math chop in here, which we'll set to 0 to 127. So now, when we hit the bass, we have control over the intensity of this thing. Scatter is next, rinse and repeat. And now we got control over the scatter. And finally, our hi-hats. And when we hit our hi-hats, we can twist the knob here and control its intensity. But y'all, we've finally built everything. We've connected everything. And if you made it this far, I really appreciate you hanging out because it's time for a jam. Let's get into it and have some fun with this.